Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hello. Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. It is Michelle Wong, and this episode is the third interview in a series of 4 interviews that I did as part of the men's series. And in this interview, I had the pleasure of interviewing a friend, Dornsmith. He is an architect and an expert when it comes to astrology, especially current events and looking at historical astrology. Super cool guy. And I met Aaron through a girlfriend of mine, and he and my friend Veronica are husband and wife, and I invited Aaron to come onto the podcast after I saw them this summer, and we were just talking about we're talking a lot about just men, women, polarity, and our conversation went pretty deep. And so I invited Aaron to come onto the show and share his journey, his experience, and his own personal growth. So I'm really excited for this episode. And a few things to note: the audio cuts in and out a little bit. It gets a lot better after like the 30-minute mark, but definitely hang in there. It's really great content and really great perspective from a man, I think, when we talk about what it means in terms of like being a healthy masculine, and just hearing Aaron's personal journey. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy the series or any of the episodes, please share it with someone you know who can benefit, or you can also share it on the social media. On Instagram, you can tag me at michellewong.xo. I'd love to get the word out for these episodes, and I really appreciate you spreading the word. Okay, without further ado, enjoy the episode. Take care. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode, this series. I'm so excited for our guest, Aaron Dornsmith, who is joining us from Montana at the moment. And Aaron, thank you so much for being on this podcast. I'm really literally so excited to talk. I know that, I know you from Seattle through Veronica, and we got to talk, all of us, when I went to visit you all, and just the topic around like male, female. And I was like, oh my God, you need to come on the show and just kind of share your perspectives, because I felt like what you had to share was it was just conversations that I feel like we need. And I just appreciated your side of things and also your own experience. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad I can do this.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, let's start with this. So I'm curious to hear your opinion. So yesterday I was at a yoga class, and I love the teacher, but she was actually, I don't think she knew this was happening, but she was male bashing. She references a few times in the beginning of class, in the middle of class. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't actually think she realizes, she thinks it's funny, but there are men in class. So what happened was she was just joking that, she is raising 2 boys, one being her son, the other one is her husband. I'm just like, did she really see that? But it's not just, her. I hear this a lot, and it actually annoys me, because it's emasculation. And that's part of I guess why I wanted to have this series, because I just feel like, especially white, cisgendered men, you know what I mean? They're
like there's like so much can be done if we just have like guys who fit that profile have our backs, you know. But a lot of time with this male bashing and all of that, it's well, why should we help in a way, like, you know, that attitude. So I'm curious what your perspective, if you were to hear that, like what goes through your mind. And I ended up asking the guys, I would talk to 3 of them afterwards just to kind of get their perspective, but I'm curious what yours would be.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great question to start with. Yeah, because I would say one is there is an irony where everyone's talking about, oh, we need equality, but there's always like an asterisk where it's like, except for white men, you know, somehow they get like disincluded from the whole thing. So already right there showing a bit of like some of the flaws of the, you know, kind of situation or the culture at the time. And obviously, you know, as you said, we can't do this all together if we're not including everyone, you know. And so, you know, that's obviously something that I want to, you know, obviously want to talk about and just say, hey, we have a blind spot here that needs to be addressed. And I would say, you know, much to your point, that's very good realization. And, you know, me growing up, I was always kind of more like a sympathetic towards women. You know, obviously, like early on, kind of like a nice guy, feminist kind of thing. You know, because obviously I understand that, like, yeah, like, equality makes sense. Women should be able to pursue things that they want, and if there are barriers, you know, we should do what we can to remove them. Obviously, that, you know, and I still stand by that. But one of the things that I noticed starting when things started to turn in a more dark direction for, you know, from the perspective of a guy or as a man is it was shortly after the Me Too movement, and you know, obviously that was very much needed. You know, that's like talk about
Yeah.
cleaning things up and bringing things to the light. You know, that was fantastic. But it did feel like, you know, with the momentum, you know, a certain amount of responsibility has to happen if you're going to take the lead in anything. And I think when there's a shift in kind of like the power dynamics, that the people who are eager to take the throne basically might not appreciate that there's responsibility, because obviously they've been fighting for that position for so long that now that they have it, you know, it's like, you know, you finish the race, congratulations, you know, you're on a runner's high kind of thing, right? But I think that's when things have to be, you have to be really careful, because you can start to make enemies at that point, you know. And one of the things that happened kind of after that was there was it's still to this day I still remember it, and I think it still has a bit of a reputation for it, but Gillette, so, you know, men's razors, you know, that their audience is men, came out with this commercial that was directed by a woman. And, you know, nothing against that, there are a lot of great movies that are directed by women, like, you know, people quote Wayne's World, well, guess what? You know, directed by a woman, and, you know, it kind of added that warmth to it.
Wait,
But
which movie?
Wayne's World.
Oh, Wayne's World.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh my God.
yeah, you know, the original like buddy comedy, you know, it's like everyone
Yeah.
just loves it. It's chill, it's fun, those guys have great chemistry. Yeah, directed by a woman who really loved music and really loved the project, and it comes through, you know, so it's wonderful movie. Yeah, something about this commercial though, it was it's called the Boys Will Be Boys commercial, I think was its nickname. But it was basically a commercial showing perceived toxic masculinity, and it was just really distasteful, you know. But again, it makes sense from a perspective, because I mean it would be no better than, I'm pretty sure, what a lot of women had to deal with commercials written by men or movies written by men about how women are supposed to behave, and women watching it going like, yeah, that's not, oh, that's not a woman. You know.
Mm-hmm.
um, Same thing, you know, where a lot of things that they were talking about were not, if you were a guy, it makes sense. But a woman telling a man how, or telling a guy how to be, it came across as very condescending. And at that point, I realized that there was a definite concern about replacing misogyny with misandry, which, you know, is not much better. So,
Wait, what's the other word that you said?
misandry.
Misandry. Have I heard of that? I
Yeah.
don't know if I know that. What does that mean? Is it the
It,
opposite? Like
yep.
hate
Basically,
towards
just
men? Okay.
instead of hatred towards women, you know. So it's instead of
Oh,
saying,
okay.
you know, oh, those, you know, silly women folk over there, now you have, oh, those silly man folk over there. It's still just as problematic, you know, because like what we're talking about at the beginning, it still prevents people from becoming empowered. You're just
Mm-hmm.
switching who's in charge of the barriers instead of getting them. And obviously, women have a lot of things to be frustrated about. But you know, that's kind of the point, is if you're wanting to take a lead, now you get to do it with responsibility and with maturity. And so if you're just going to replace it with man bashing, then it's no better than, women bashing that we had, decades prior. So yeah, so that's kind of why, going back to your yoga class, that's a big problem, but it's one of those things where I think that there's a second dynamic in there where, and this is the other interesting thing too, because by if women accept that sense of misandry, then it just reinforces the men have power script, because the reason they say that they can do it is, oh, those are just men, they can take it, by
Mm.
which meaning that they still have power. So it's like even subconsciously it keeps that script going,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, you know, yeah, it's just like you wouldn't attack a woman because, women aren't as powerful and they can defend, but you can attack a man because they are power. So it's just still showing a very unconscious bias towards these things, and it's not necessarily something that justifies the action either, unfortunately. So, no, that's
Yeah.
be my take. But yeah, great question to start.
Yeah. So like, okay, so going back to then, if you were in that class, so to speak, like would you have been like, I don't know, what would you have been like, well, that was offensive, or would it just like, I'm just curious because I would, if I don't know, I guess I would have been annoyed.
And I guess it also depends too, if because humor is a very beautiful thing, but it is very complex, because humor, when done properly, can reveal truth, and that's why people laugh, right? Like I heard a story where there's this guy who, when he was hanging out with his buddies in a gym, would try to make them laugh, because as you're tensing up your muscles and everything like that, and if you make someone laugh, everything relaxes, so they can't do anything, and they
Mhm.
have to drop their weights, and it's just kind of funny how the body just reacts to that. But at the same time, there's also like sardonic humor too, which is, just kind of, I just don't like that kind of humor, because it's just, again, I think putting people down, and it kind of makes humor kind of dirty in a way that I don't appreciate. So I guess it would also depend what kind of joke it is.
Yeah.
But if there is that sense of sardonic, obviously, I guess for me, I would be like, you get you get a pass, one pass, because who knows, maybe you're having a bad day, maybe you needed to just say these sort of things. But if it keeps up, obviously you just need to say something, and obviously with a yoga class, that's voluntary. It's not like you're stuck there. So it's like, hey, I'm really not appreciating this. And if not, then I can't be welcome here, so.
Yeah. 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 Awesome. Yeah. I remember like just around our conversation while I was visiting. There was something that you shared that I just so appreciate. I think it was like your own personal arc or journey of your own growth. And I was like, I'm curious if this is like you, if it was your own personal passage, so to speak, or do you think like a lot of guys have that vision? And we talked about the Way of the Superior Man, which you and Veronica both recommended it to me, and I was like, oh. But anyways, I can talk about that. But it was like how you were like, oh, I wanted to be like a better person, and so you were like on this conscious like mission of wanting to grow and like get out of your comfort zone and just strive for something just different, because you're like, oh, like I don't want to be playing video games or whatever. Like what, I'm curious, like what was, if you remember like that your own personal turning point and what kind of propelled you?
That's a very good question, because yeah, I feel like I think that's part of it too. Is as I mentioned earlier, that I was kind of in a more nice guy camp, because obviously growing up, especially in our times, it feels like boys are raised by women far more than they are by men. So we tend to be more in that line, which is it does create problems. because I think in some cases, in a very unconscious way, it can instill a sense of misandry within the boy itself, which is a problem because you're male. So if you're male hating, you're kind of hating yourself, and that is very toxic. But again, it's also very difficult to spot, and very easy to have happen. And not to say, it's intentional or malicious or anything like that. It just happens because, yeah, mom knows the feminine perspective, so that's what she can instill. She doesn't know the masculine or the male perspective, and so that with that piece missing, yeah, it does create a hole. Maybe innocent too, but it's still there, needs to be addressed. And so, for me growing up, I had a sense of that. I realized after a while, but so I did try to do like that. Oh, let me be very emotional and be a good listener to, because basically you're just listening to like the gripes women, like your parent or your mom would have about men. That's what they do. And as a boy, you're like, okay, I want to do that because apparently doing the opposite's bad, so it's like you don't want to be a jerk, you want to be sympathetic, you want to be listening. And so, obviously growing up and trying those things, it was lackluster results to begin with. Because in the end, part of the reason that you're doing this is so you can be in a relationship with a woman, and that's part of it, is trying to figure out how that works. And yeah, so I did feel like growing up, trying those things out, even like in high school years, I'd have a crush on this girl, and, would try to ask her out, but she was just like, no, thanks. But then, obviously she'd go after the quote unquote bad boy, and I'm like, but I'm a nice guy, so there's obviously a bad boy, nice guy dynamic. And yeah, that's frustrating, especially when you're a teenage boy, because, you're trying to do what's right. This guy's not doing any of those rules and he's succeeding. And why is that? Because he's the person that, probably my mom complained about, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. So it's like already you're running upon the first paradox or, contradiction, we'll say. But then also, going into college years and just kind of still on that track, it was interesting to see that with other nice guys, we'll say, that when you start to hit that age, and especially with people on the internet more often than, face-to-face communication, a lot of those, nice guys, and at this point, I'll start using it as a slur because you start to realize just how toxic those guys were. They still try to be like, oh, I'm very sympathetic, you can talk to me. But then when the girl rejects them, they go on like this huge tirade, So it's like, you were never being sincere in the first place, and it was just really disgusting. And so, it was obviously at that point we have to step back and realize, okay, there's something wrong with this approach because, that is not healthy. If the woman says no, that's her business. You go on with your life. If you go into this huge, like, yelling at her or that sort of thing, I mean, that's not mature. That's not good. And if that's all that's here, then we're clearly missing some pieces. And so I think that's kind of when I started to move out from that camp in a way. And obviously just kind of on my own trying to figure this out. And I remember it was at this point after college. I graduated in 2009 with an architecture degree, which was useless. So so for a bit, I just moved back with my grandfather, and he was very elderly at that point. So while I was there, just to keep myself busy and still wanting to improve things, I was helping to clean up his place. He had sheds that hadn't been touched in years, and the garage was kind of overflowing. So I'm like, I can go through and clean stuff up. And I was cleaning one of the back sheds that had been neglected for a long time, and there's really cool stuff in there. Like he had like this old pickaxe from the railroad that you would use to break the ice off the tracks. He just had one of those back there. It's just really cool,
A pickaxe from
Yeah.
back in the day?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It was really cool. Yeah, because it had like a wedge on the other end. So it's like an axe on one side and then like a chisel on the other just to get rid of the ice. Yeah, it was cool stuff. And then there's like this towing chain that was back there, this really heavy thing. And so I just had to pick it up to move it. And as I'm lifting up this heavy chain, I don't know why, but this just gives me like a good amount of satisfaction. No real reason. I'm just lifting this heavy thing, and that makes me happy. And that's kind of when I started to realize that there are just things about being a male that you just appreciate that women are just not going to appreciate. It just doesn't occur to them. But it's just weird, innate things that wouldn't seem so obvious. But it's things that it's like a bunch of small things that add up over time. And so that was one of them. Was like, hey, I just kind of like lifting this heavy thing. That's all there is to it. Being able to move it places, that's really cool. You also feel like you're making an impact that way too. And I think that helps. And I think, obviously anyone wants that, but it's weird. It's nice that you can do it in a very specific way. So yeah, so I think after that, trying to really dive more into kind of like masculinity, because the other thing too is, and I did move to Seattle, and I finally got a job as an architect intern. And I remember I was at this, at this house that was under remodel, and we met like a carpenter there who's working on cabinets. It's another weird thing, but I just see this guy, and he just seems like a nice guy, kind of like I can't remember, but it kind of more like if you imagine it as like a cartoon animal, more like a gopher or something like that, just kind of like
Gopher.
that. You know what I mean? But like, yeah, kind of like a nice, comfortable persona, probably like has like a really nice house and, nice food and that sort of thing, but a very comfortable guy, no harsh corners or anything. And I think that was at that point that I started to recognize the internal misandry that I had, because it's like, oh, but this guy's a man, blah, blah, but he's cool, And I'm like, wait a second, why is this script here? It seems to be a problem. So, and I think that was just it, is starting to get comfortable with the man tribe that I think I was at least unconsciously trying to avoid because of that script that I had inside of me.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to kind of like, before you go on with the story, I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to like go back to a few things. So
Mhm,
the nice guy, right? Like, so
mhm,
what I mean, I've seen like, articles or books saying like nice guys, like I remember there was a course at the community college, something about like not being like helping. It was like a class for men to not be a nice guy. Like that's not it. It's like how to not be a yes man, I guess. That's like
mhm,
not like to, I guess it's like not to have boundaries and to have a spine. I guess that was like
mhm.
what the class was, because I read the description. I was like, oh, this is interesting. So it sounds like the nice guy, what I heard as you described it was just someone who is like, that's how should I explain? Because like there's pieces of it. I'm like, actually, like, I appreciate a guy that listens and is empathetic.
Right.
But I
Mhm,
think you mean more than that, like
mhm.
in terms of like, but that I
That,
guess the masculine energy, which I think this is where, because you're talking about toxic masculinity, and I
mhm.
don't love that word. I think I mentioned that. It's just like, I think that's a little like, I like another word, like the immature masculine. That's something that
That's a good phrase. Yeah,
versus,
yeah. Yeah, let's
yeah.
rock with that.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't saying like, oh, don't say that. Don't say
Oh
toxic
yeah, no, but I,
masculinity.
I like that way better. You're right. It's more it's more accurate. So that's what I love about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and what was I going to say? Well, okay. So I have a question. Because I'll go back to toxic masculinity just for a brief bit, because my image of that is someone who is like a guy who is like, the only, I guess, emotions they can express is anger, or maybe like, I don't know, like they show some form of celebration or happiness at some point, right? But the default is it's safe for me to express my anger, and I'm going to keep all the rest of my feelings in. And I don't know, like to me, like that's a form of toxic masculinity, not being able to connect with someone because you don't want to cry or whatever. Like, and so yeah, I'm curious about the nuances there, because like I
Yeah.
understand, I think that's hard for guys. It's like, well, it's not safe, it might not be safe to show emotions. And also it's like, I don't want to be that nice guy where I can't get the woman, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious like about that, because I I yeah, like I don't want to be in a society where
Mhm.
men don't feel like they can express their emotions.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's our emotions is what I think it's important. And at the same time, I understand like what you were saying, like when you picked up the chain, is that you felt like strong or masculine, like like you felt
Yeah.
that. I will say that I do feel good when I use my physical strength to carry something. I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, I
yeah, yeah.
did it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I'm not saying it's exclusive, but there's just some physical delight about that, you know.
Yeah.
And you're right. It is very complex, and I think, but yeah, I think that's just one of those things that people look at, like, mm, men in movies or that sort of thing, and obviously that's what you try to emulate, and they seem simple, and so that's why you try to emulate. But the thing is, it's like if you try to follow those roles in a straightforward manner, you're going to miss a twist to make it work. Is there's still like a subtle change or paradox on the man side too that makes those things work. So to answer your question, like, yeah, what is it about like nice guys? Because even as you said, it's like, yeah, you want someone who's going to be sympathetic or empathetic and listen to you and everything like that. But at the same time, it can't be the only thing. And so it's like, but what is that? Or you want a man who shows emotions. But I think one of the other things that is a bit of a misconception in our society, or just one of the things that we haven't really thought about, is that the emotions for a man is going to be different than emotions for a woman.
Mm,
So that's part of it. We have a different playbook in a way, and so yeah, we might feel similar things, like, but we'll have to handle them in different ways for reasons. So a good example is kind of like that stoic masculine, right? Because obviously you see like the John Wayne or Clint Eastwood types, you're like, oh, there's a man who doesn't feel anything, I want to be like that guy. But the thing is that it's not, stoicism like that is not avoiding your emotions, but it's a mastery of your emotions, which means you've had to,
mastery. Okay.
yeah, it means you had to, like, basically go through hell, your own personal hell, and come to terms with that. Because if not, then you're always going to come off as like that toxic guy that you mentioned. Because those guys, yeah, and that's why I love your change of topic. Those are definitely immature masculine roles. Either the brute or the nice guy, right? They don't have the emotional maturity to interact with a woman in a way that she can feel received. But the thing
Mm,
is in order to do that, it's not like, because again, like, going back to what we are talking about earlier about, being a nice guy versus the bad boy, it's like, you know, growing up, it's like women didn't want some guy to cry with. That just kind of gave them icky feelings. They wanted a man whose shoulder they could cry on and know that they still held him. And so that's the thing. It's like, this is not a game of symmetry. It's a game of complementary natures. Right? And
okay.
so,
Hold on, you cut off right there, but I heard you,
oh,
but just in
mhm,
case there were listeners. So you're saying like in terms of the emotions, you're saying how women like if they're crying, it's like they want a shoulder to cry on, not like a guy to be crying with her. I guess in a like
mhm,
if it's in a actual romantic relationship is like
yeah.
if shit hit the fan, it's like I don't want the guy to I guess be crying because like hey help solve the problem.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. You don't want your man to fall apart when you fall apart, because that makes things worse and unsafe. You want a guy who's like, who at that point, and this is where like that stoic nature can come through. It's like he's not feeling anything. He's feeling everything you're feeling, but that's not going to stop him. But that's the thing. He's acting with those emotions at heart. So when he puts his arm around you, it's because he's feeling it, but he's not falling to pieces with you because he has to help you through. And that's kind of
Ah,
more that stoic nature. That's why those guys, if they can hit those notes, can be really attractive because it's like, yeah, I got it. I got you. We'll get through this together. That's what we're aiming for here. Because then, the man can feel successful for being a man, being able to provide a service to the woman. And that's really
yeah.
what, the man wants, is just to know that, hey, I feel good. My woman appreciates me. Therefore, I have a reason to exist. That's the secret, like, anxiety of most men, I think, at our core.
The secret anxiety is what?
Oh, just, like, can I get a woman's approval? Because
Mm,
especially growing up, and obviously it should be mentioned that obviously we're talking about, same, straight couples, that sort of thing. But
Oh yes, I
yeah,
should probably, yeah.
just general
It's
disclaimer.
just, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was laughing or smiling when you were saying that, just around like the whole shoulder to cry on, and it's like we can't both be falling apart.
Mhm.
I remember like I was in one of my relationships where I was freaking out about something. I don't remember what it was, and like my boyfriend at the time, he was not, and I was like, I can't believe you're not freaking out, like, and he's like, you want me to freak out with you? And I was like, I paused and I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I was just like, oh yeah, good point, but I was freaking out, so it was nice to get, I guess, like the sturdiness,
Yeah.
and I think like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to interrupt, but I was laughing to myself because I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's the whole polarity, which we can talk about, but
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, as a woman in that situation, doesn't it feel good to know that you can completely fall apart, you can be messy, and your guy's not scared. He's not scared away. He's still going to be with you through it.
yeah, I think that's like, like I just, yes, the answer is yes to that. And I don't know who I was talking to, but it's like if I could like just like if I could have it all my way type of thing, like I would want to be like be in a relationship with a guy where I could even throw my rage, not necessarily like
Mhm.
I I don't know. Like I don't, because I don't think that's really healthy, but like I would want a guy who is strong enough to be able to withstand
Mhm.
my occasional tempestuous self and not take it personally like I'm literally attacking him, even though
Mhm.
it might feel like it in that moment. But I just want to feel like there's a safe container for me to be my feminine wave,
Mhm.
which sounds, I don't know, but then like I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm raging at my guy,
Oh,
but I
right.
like the idea of knowing that I can, but I won't.
Right. And, again, it's very tricky and there's subtle differences. Because again, it's like, yeah, the metaphor of the woman as the ocean is, it's kind of a cool metaphor because you're right. Sometimes, she's just a relaxing waves on a sunny day that's very calming and soothing. And some days, you're right, she's a tempest storm. But it's one of those things where, sometimes as a guy, you feel like an old sea dog on like one of those like tempest with the high waves. And instead of being like, oh, let's hide underboard, you're like crackling. It's like, oh, this storm's insane. This is great. But again, it's like it goes back to what's the intent, and I think a good guy can or a good man can sense that, uh, are you attacking him or are you just flailing in every direction and happen to hit him,
Mm,
and I think that is also a very tough challenge for men, especially, that I think is a common pitfall, is how to take criticism, especially from a woman. Because again, you hold your woman's opinion highly. And I think this was one of the other lessons that I had to learn too, is uh, take her opinions seriously, obviously, but not as gospel.
mm.
Because basically, if she makes a complaint, maybe it's true, or maybe she's just feeling something and expressing in that, and it's just that's how she's expressing. Like maybe, yeah, like she just had like a really bad day in traffic, right? And driving home was a huge pain, and so she's yelling at you, "Why don't you drive me more places?" Blah blah. It's not that she wants to. She's her core thing is that she just the stress from driving, and but that's the thing is that takes some discernment to figure out what's critical, what's not. But I think the other thing too is criticism, especially from a woman, cuts really deep for men in
Mm.
a very unique way. And I think that part of the reason why I was able to get a thick hide of it is I went to architecture school. Part of it is taking criticisms. That's what they're called. They're called
You were
critics.
trained.
Oh yeah, you take the thing that you've been working on all semester, you put it on a wall, and you just watch people tear to shreds. Sometimes literally. I think I had a professor do that to one of my models. He just
Oh my
starts tearing it up. I'm like,
God.
all right, well that just happened. But again, it's like it's a weird thing to learn that you are and that you are also not your emotions. It's a weird thing, but
Mm.
if you can get that kind of barrier, and that's kind of why it shows up as men not being sensitive, But that's why, because if a guy's sensitive, then you critique him and then he's instantly reacting. That's not helpful. But if you have a little bit of a barrier there, so that way you can consider, you still have like some sort of discernment that helps. So again, like, if the woman's critique, complaining or just like upset about something, you can hear it and try to listen to the message underneath it and then hear what she's really saying. Because I mean, she's obviously upset about something, but you don't know exactly what. And that's part of the discernment. And, if you can find that space and address it, then obviously that helps a lot. But it's difficult, to be able to do that and to get there. And as I said, if a person does it right, it comes across as, like someone who doesn't feel things or that sort of thing. It's like, oh, that guy's so cool, so stoic. It's like, no, he's feeling the whole thing, he's discerning the whole thing, he's trying to find the best solution for both people. And the other element too that's very important, this whole thing, is because he cares. That has to be what underpins the whole thing, is that he cares about the woman, so and I think that can also be overlooked. So, like when we're talking about the mature guy, it's because it's all about him. If things didn't go well, if he got critiqued, then that looks poorly on him. So the only way to get back into grace is to lash out at whoever attacked him, and then that creates, your kind of like, I guess, toxic spirals in that case.
Taking a break from my conversation with Aaron to share that on Sunday, November 19th at 4 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be leading a virtual breathwork group. And in previous mentions about this particular breathwork, we were going to do breathwork on abundance. However, something different is coming through, so we are not going to be breathing on abundance. So the topic is currently TBD, but you can definitely join without knowing what the topic is, because you can always bring your own intention during the breathwork. And so it is still on early bird until Friday, November 10th, or you can book through that day for early bird. And I am so excited. Big things are coming. So if you want to snag your spot, definitely register. Links to sign up are in the show notes. And as always, it is open for everybody. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, back to the show.
Yeah. So you were muffly a bit. So you were saying the immature guy, if someone was to criticize or whatever, seemingly attack him, he would make it about him and take it personally and downward spiral, and that can go into the whole toxic stuff. Yeah, it's funny because as you were saying that, I was remembering on Netflix there's this I think it's Jimmy Yang. He's a comedian. He was in Crazy Rich Asians. He was Bernard in Crazy Rich Asians, for anyone who's seen it. But in his comedy show, he was talking about like basically what you were saying around like, oh, I'm in a relationship now, and what I've learned when my girlfriend gets angry or really pissed off and she might be yelling at me, I now know to like Tai Chi it. It's like, it's not about me. I got to go deeper, and I just got to like kind of like move that energy. And like, it was just funny the way he talked about it. It's like, it's really not about me. And it's like, you got to dig deeper. Oh, like, why are you actually feeling that way?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which I think is actually accurate, because there's always something under the surface, right? And I think like that there is a safety thing. Like if a woman feels safe to be able to like express the emotions and like even the frustration, and have the guy be like not, I don't know, spiral down at it, then it creates a stronger container. But I will say like there's a lot of immature men in this world that they don't have that capacity to receive it, because they will take it personally. And I think that's what you were saying about like criticism from a woman can cut deep. I think like maybe for immature men, that's their deflection, right? Of throwing it back at the women because it was hurtful, and they don't know how to necessarily handle that.
Right. Well, and also too, there has to be a sense of ownership among the guy too, because it's not, because that's the other thing too. It's like what the woman says can be true. If like all of a sudden, for the third week in a row, you didn't take the trash out to the curb and now it's overflowing, and now it's a real problem and she's getting on you about that. Well, guess what? That's true, but the thing is that you also have to, and this is another thing where, it's a subtle difference, but it makes sense now. And you have to be bigger than the woman. And I mean that like emotionally as much as anything else, because in that instance, you have to accept your flaws, accept that she's right, accept the criticism, and figure out how do I do better. And that is really hard. And I don't mean to say that lightly because that's taken years for me to, start to get a handle on. And there's still times, obviously when Veronica goes up, I'm like, I have to take a breath, take a deep breath. I'm like, okay, what's she trying to get at? Am I really wrong here? Yeah, my bad. Okay. But the thing though is just trying to keep in mind the bigger picture, which is when she's saying that, hopefully both you and her want the same thing, which is a better you. So
Mm.
if you can just overlook that moment and see what she's saying, then obviously it's room to improve. And hopefully as a man, that's things that you look forward to. Because I mean, you think about it, right? Professionally, as an example, I mean, how often do you like work on improving your skills, right? It's like, oh, or this project didn't go as well as you'd hope. What can you do better? You're in a professional environment, it's very easy to accept those criticisms because you do want to be the best, or you want to be tough, or you want to be capable, whatever word you want, but you want to be the most you can be. And so you take those criticisms, you try to incorporate it, and then you try to improve yourself. But somehow when it comes to relationships, somehow that doesn't translate, and that's an obvious problem. It's like, no, it's the same thing. It's just this one's more uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
I think that has definitely been, I think, one of the best lessons that I actually have learned from Veronica too, is how to overcome things. And I love that word overcome, but also how do you get bigger than? Because that's basically what overcome means is, in those instances when you're afraid, when you have that sense of fear, that's because the thing that you're thinking about is somehow bigger than you. It's an abstract
Mm.
concept. It doesn't actually exist, right? But somehow you've made it bigger than you. You think that you're like this little thing, and this thing that she's mentioning is this big thing. You're like, oh no, so you cower away, right? So the question is, how do you make yourself bigger than that thing so you can overcome it? And so
Mhm.
that way, when it comes up again, you're like, oh no, I can do this. I've already gone through this. Maybe you have to do it the hard way, where you're like, oh yeah. So I definitely learned from that long agonizing weekend. Definitely don't do this because it's going to make everything hell for you for days. But now I know it's if it happens again, I know I lived through it. That's very helpful, but it's really scary to do and very difficult to do. It's like, that's the other lesson that I've learned from Veronica too, is addressing your inferior side, which for guys, I'm assuming, are a lot of emotions, because we'd like to be rational. Let's try to cut things, try to see things clearly. If things interfere with that, just try to push it aside. And unfortunately, emotions usually fit that camp. So to feel into those moments of insecurity where you feel the smallest and to try to work with that, man, if you want growth fast, that's a spot to do it because you can make leaps and bounds by addressing those issues. So yeah.
Wait, so feeling into your emotions?
Well, more so your inferior emotions, because if you think about, and not even just emotions. I mean, that's just an example here, but like things that you're not good at. There's things that you have strengths with, because obviously guys love to play to their strengths. That makes sense. We want to be impressive. We want to know that you can look at us and go, oh, that's a capable guy right there. Great. But that also means that there are things that you're not attending to that get placed into the inferior side. So, maybe if it's, you love to be very planned and orderly and you have a schedule and everything like that. And if you have that schedule or that plan, you feel comfortable. And then if anyone else is like, do you have a plan? Like, yeah, it's A, B, and C, and then D after that. You're like, oh, that guy has a plan, right? And that probably means you're not very good being spontaneous. And
Mm.
so if that plan doesn't cut through, or if you have to improvise, or if things really hit the fan, how useful are you? So if all of a sudden you had to do like a weekend where you get dropped somewhere and there's no plan, you just have to be spontaneous, then, that would be very scary to that person. That'd be their inferior side. But if they can just take a little bit of time to work with it, they can make so much growth from those instances. Because again, if you're near zero, then that growth goes a long way. Whereas if this is something you've been working on for like years and ahead, you might get little growth from continuing to work on it, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I love that, actually, what you were saying around, like, basically it's like becoming a better person, like whatever their weaknesses are, like growing that. Yeah, I like that perspective. And I think that's kind of like what you're saying, like being willing to face the inferiority. Yeah. It's interesting because I was watching The Amazing Race and there was like this couple and they were on the race, and like the husband was just grilling at the wife, like almost like pushing her, like verbally trying to push her and get her to move. But she's got two kids. Like she's just like, she's not going to be as like fast or like, and I was thinking to myself, because he was trying to like push her by like criticizing her. And I was like, that might work for like a man to, I don't know, not necessarily criticize, but like, you can do this. You just got to push yourself and like work hard. And I don't know, like she was just not, because it doesn't motivate a woman, I don't think, as much as that would motivate another guy. I thought that
Right.
was interesting when I watched it.
But that's exactly, a good example of, we're playing by two different playbooks, especially on the emotions. It's like, yeah, that could fire up a guy. It's like, don't worry, you can push through it. You can be tougher. You got this. Just like three more, you're almost there, and then you can top off, and boom, you be a champ. And that works for guys. Obviously, I can't speak about being a woman, but from what I heard, less results. So
Yeah, like it was just like, I was like, oh, but he was doing it in a way that was like, it wasn't even encouraging, it was like through criticism, like in a way, I don't know, it was just like, um I was like, this is not going to bode well. But
well, that's actually a good point, because that's another thing I think women don't quite understand about watching guys or men together, is when we heckle each other, right? Is
yeah.
basically, it's in a weird way, it's like a sense of inoculation, right? Where it's like you tease each other, you give each other a hard time in a safe environment, so that way when things go down, that person isn't going to fall apart when those items come up, because hopefully he's already been like tested about it, he has some acknowledgement of it, so that way, you know when things are tough, that person can still stay reliable, and instead of cracking under some sort of emotional duress. So that's generally why you see a lot of guys making fun of each other or teasing each other. It's in a weird way, it's like emotional sparring in a safe environment, so that way, and I think it can be really healthy too, because it also helps to say that one other guy who cares about you, again, you got to have that caring as the underlying basis, but some guy who cares about you is going to point out your flaws and say, hey, you're a real dumbass when it comes to this, but guess what, we're still friends, it's fine, but work on this, it's not the end of the world. But you know what I mean, it's like, it helps to keep those emotions in perspective too, instead of it being like the biggest thing ever. It's like, yeah, that's a problem, it happens, not the end of the world, you can move through it. So it's very helpful when done right.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like, it's interesting, the dynamics. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't jive well for
Yeah,
women.
right, exactly. It's like when women see it, and so this is where, like, now that women are in power and they can make calls, there's where you start to see some of these misconceptions start to come through. So it's like, oh, we need some anti-bullying things, because you can look at that treatment, it's like, oh, those boys are bullying each other. It's like, I mean, again, if there's that care that's underlying the whole
Yeah.
thing, no. But if there's two guys who don't have that care and are adversarial towards each other, but at the same time, that's also helpful too, because it's like what we were talking about. If you know what you can live through, it's not a big thing later on. So it's like, it's easier to have skirmishes on the schoolyard than it is out in life, because those things are usually comical when you watch them. It's like, you're 12 years old, you haven't even started your like puberty yet, you have no muscle on you. Yeah, I want to see how this goes. Yeah, it's like two dueling like flippy fan things.
Oh my gosh. I appreciate like what you're saying about like from like if it's two best friends maybe and they're like, then it's like there's that care and so that it's safe. And also your perspective, like even if it is like dueling in the yard or whatever, it's like you're learning. And so it's like, well, either way, it's that you can grow from that experience
Yeah.
to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to you're sharing your personal journey. So you saw yourself as just more like, okay, I'm a nice guy. And so you turned that around. What did you do? so so like you were saying like things along the way that made you realize, oh, this actually isn't working. And can I like you were realizing that because of your relationship, like your romantic relationships with women, was that kind of like the awareness, or were there also like in the workplace? Like, I'm curious, like the realizations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Workplace always seemed like it was fine. So, because again, it's like, yeah, you just show up, you go to school, you do the work. If you have a good attitude, it goes a long way. That's actually pretty easy because again, it's just kind of more rational, so that lend it easily to me. But yeah, the relationships, that was hard because high school through college and shortly thereafter, obviously I had an off and on relationship with this one woman, and that was toxic. But again, I didn't realize it until the end, where I realized another um, kind of difficulty trying to make things symmetrical between men and women um, is, and just bear with me for a second, but when it comes to abuse, it's easy to prove abuse with a bruise, but it's much harder to prove abuse with emotional manipulation, you know.
Mm,
And so because of that, I think that's another reason why men can be seen as aggressors and brutes, because it's more obvious, you know. And I'm not saying it's good, mind you, but it's easier to see. It's like, oh, like that guy's yelling, or that sort of thing. There's easy evidence that's quick to see, and it's not subtle. But when it is subtle, and because again, like you see like henpecked men whose wives are constantly criticizing him and cutting him down. I mean that in itself is abuse.
yeah.
But it's a harder to recognize. And again, I think it also goes back to this the theory that men have power, so that's okay. Which
Mm,
also not entirely true either. A good example of this, just real quick, is we like to say that, oh, men have power because they're part of the 1%. Yeah, true, but they also make up most of the prison population. So it's like almost the homeless people are men. So it's difficult because it's easy to see successes that you kind of ignore the failures, and there's a lot more guys who fail than there are successes.
mm,
Uh, but anyways, so going back to it though, that happened with me with the off and on again relationship, and um, yeah, just realizing that I was pretty close to losing myself, my esteem and that sort of thing, and just becoming that henpecked guy. And it was a moment of realization of wanting more for myself. So I kind of started to come back from that. And, obviously we broke up because it wasn't going to last. But that also made me want to introspect to figure out, how did this happen? Why did this come up? And I think a good example of this was I actually moved cities. This is when I left Boise to Seattle. And I realized I was still attracted to the same type of woman.
mm,
And obviously, it's like, okay, this is a pattern. This is on me. What am I doing wrong? And I think part of it was that trying to be appeasing to women and that sort of, because basically, if you're trying to be appeasing and soft, then you need a hard woman to compliment you. And that wasn't working in my case. And so that was something that I had to recognize, was how some of these scripts were getting me in trouble, and not something that I wanted. And obviously, I would assume there's a generalization. Most people or most guys would agree with me, but not all. You will know your own situation, obviously. Uh, but I think that there's a lot of guys out there who want to say they're the soft guys, so that way they don't have to accept responsibility. So they're using that
mm.
out.
Interesting. Wait, so like define soft guy. Like you said appeasing, like going
Mhm,
like so that they don't have to, oh, so they just agree with the woman and
mhm.
therefore when
They,
shit hits the fan, they're like, well, you said
mhm.
it, like you
Yep.
wanted that. Interesting.
I gave you what you wanted, and this is where it led, and that's not my fault because I took no responsibility for this. You were the lead. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Ooh.
Because I think that was also part of like the nice guy camp that did a lot of that was that they just didn't want to take responsibility. They didn't want to, own themselves. So they would be really sensitive to criticism because they wouldn't want to own up to it, basically. And I think that was definitely a thing that trips them up in a way that it obviously doesn't have desirous results. So let's figure out how to overcome it and be better and do better. So yeah, and so that kind of helps
Yeah.
me to try different directions, and obviously that there's a lot of um, trials and trying to figure things out because yeah, like I think that I had a couple role models like my grandfather. Oh my gosh, he was basically my primary male role model, but obviously of
Mm.
a much older generation. And then I had my dad, who is a great father, but I think as a male role model left stuff to be desired because I think he was a bit more of the appeasement type, and that
Mm.
obviously where I learned it, it was working. So it's also part of having to overcome that kind of training or things that you inherited from your family too, uh, because I know it. I hate to say it, but it did work for him in the end too. So it's like, okay, this isn't working long term. So just trying different things, trying to tune into myself, what do I like, and that sort of thing. But one thing I will say, and I know this is surprisingly controversial, but it has been really helpful. And I know been really helpful for a lot of other guys in my position where it's like we're trying to figure out how to be men, but we just don't know how to do it anymore. And that was, listening to, Dr. Jordan Peterson and some of his lectures. And, because here's a guy who's going to be quoted, his quote in history is going to be clean your room. That is saying something, because it's like, wait. He's going to be known for that. People actually want to clean their room, but it's one of those things where he goes into the depths of it and he shows the use of responsibility. Because I think that's one of those things. I've been reading a bit of Freud recently because I heard it in a podcast and I thought it was really interesting. Society and Its Discontents is the book, and basically Freud's premise is that obviously when you're an infant or a child, the world is given to you, and it's like this kind of like paradise, and then all of a sudden pain comes, right? And how do you deal with pain? And so there's a sense of trying to push off pain. And that also helps to establish the ego, where it's like everything's you until pain, and then that thing's definitely not you. So that means there has to be a you and a them, and so it starts to differentiate. But I think the other thing too is, again, it's just an innocent problem that has erupted by being raised by moms primarily, is the mom wants to keep the child safe. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very beautiful. But at some point, the child has to step out of the house and go into the real world. And that's kind of the thing that Freud was saying is that, yeah, society sucks. It's painful. It's like, he's like, there are three types of pain that I've noticed. One is from being a biological entity. Two is from being a mortal entity, and three is interacting with other people.
The last one.
Right, but it's true, like going back to, the traffic example. It's like, oh man, that's frustrating because other people are driving the way that I want them to drive. There's always things like that. People have different perspectives, and it's going to be a clash all the time. And, the more complex, like a city, there's so many complications, regulations you got to follow, and, it can be really stressful. And so it's very easy for a boy growing up to go, why on earth would I ever want to do that? And then the mother who wants to keep this son safe is like, well, you don't have to. You can stay here as long as you need, right?
Mm.
But that means that the boy will never develop into a man because what they're missing is, the father who knows the ropes and goes, yeah, it sucks. It really does. But you know what? There's a great time. It's like if you never leave the house, you never get to see the sights. It's like climbing up a mountain. Does it suck? Yeah. Is the view at the top spectacular? Yeah. Unfortunately, you're never going to know it until you get out there. and that it helps to instill that confidence into boys that I think, especially right now, is really missing. And so to have someone like Jordan Peterson, which is like, no, this is some rules for life that can lead well. You can take responsibility. This is a result. If you just stay in your safe space, you're never going to accomplish anything, and you're never going to be a good partner. Have a family, and these things, add meaning to a man's life. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So what was that name? Ferguson?
Peterson.
Jordan Peterson?
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Jordan Peterson.
I've never, so you say it might be controversial because his quote is like, go clean your room.
Yeah,
Why
it's
would that be
interesting.
controversial?
He's been kind of in the middle of a firestorm. I mean, he more so in the last few years, but it seems to taper off now. But yeah, he was, I know, like it's one of those names that you drop and the people like, oh, instantly, I don't like it because you like that one. But it's almost like it becomes a straw man in a way. And I think that is part of the reason is that he's looking for ways to strengthen and empower men, and I think that there's
Interesting.
some people who, might find that as a challenge, so, and again, it's not to say that, and I think it is still like how the power dynamics right now are very tumultuous. And so,
Hmm.
obviously women have just gotten power, and that they want to hold on to it. And so if men started to become empowered again, then they're afraid they'd lose it. But if that's the case, then they never really had power in the first place, because it's the same thing if you flip it, right? Where, and this is where, like you get the immature men, where if a woman tries to express herself, if he finds it as something to be ashamed of or try to shut down, he was never really that mature in the first place. So he never really had that power, and so I think we're seeing things on both sides with that, and again, nothing wrong with it. We're just not used to seeing the other half,
Yeah, I also feel like it's like, well, society is shifting and also like, yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like we haven't had on a societal level really good role models in general. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like we're kind of like they're obviously on like an individual, like some people might have good role
Mhm.
models, but on a collective, it's
Yeah.
like we're all traumatized at one point or another, and we're all trying to like figure things out, and we don't know.
Yeah.
Like the
Oh,
blind
totally
leading the
agree.
blind.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too is like you're right, like, and I think that's what's really cool about now is it's such a great opportunity because historically going back a couple generations, like my grandparents' generation, they went through the war, so they were very disciplined and very ordered and masculine, so they might have come across as hyper masculine, and then the next generation with the boomers come along and they're like, oh, we don't want any of that, so they push away from it, and they're like, oh, you don't need those traditional, gender roles. You can be whatever you want, and so what they ended up doing in that rebellion is destroying all structures,
Mm.
which was fine. But then here are us in the third generation going, and the boomers like, we gave you freedom, and they're like, yeah, but what do? Whatever you want, which is what? Whatever you
Chaos.
want. Any hints, any suggestions, just a general direction, And I feel like that's why a lot of us are lost. But at the same time, you're right. It's like we're in a new position now where you do have men and women together in the workforce, and the results speak for themselves. We're best businesses usually have close to a 50-50 mix, because the diversity works really well, but it does take some extra uh, some extra learning to do,
Yeah.
because there's obviously things that we've inherited through evolution, through history, whatever, that we have to challenge now, and yeah, it's like women are in the workplace, they're people too. How do you interact with them? Because now it can't just be guy, like what we're talking about earlier, like if it's a bunch of guys and you do the buddy buddy humor thing, that works for amongst guys, but for women, could be a problem, So you have to learn those muscles too, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting and I appreciate everything that you've been saying. There was something that, oh, I, so I wanted to, um, I love this about your story with Veronica. So listeners, like Veronica's amazing.
Yeah, she is.
Veronica, yeah. So I met Erin through Veronica, and we were talking at dinner, and it was about your courtship, and I asked because I was like, well, what made because you met at a swinging dance class or whatever,
Mhm.
and then you and Veronica started dating. But there was something that you said to her, and I just loved it because I think it was at that moment that Veronica was like, "Oh, right," because she was seeing other people, and can you share that? And also, like, I like because I think by then you've like you were shifting, like you've already shifted away from the whole like the appeasing nice guy. And so like you're confident, right? And so
Yeah.
yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, or at least, I was definitely working on it, and I think that was definitely one of those points where it came together. Yeah, because yeah, when we were first dating, and you first date, it's things aren't serious yet, but we hit that point where all of a sudden things are starting to move in a serious direction, and we were just having a conversation about it, and she's like, "Well, I do want to be completely open with you, and I don't want to, deceive you in any way. So I just want you to know that I am polyamorous and I am seeing 5 guys." And it was just one of those moments where I just look at it and go, "Yeah, but they haven't met me yet."
I
It was just,
love that.
but it was just one of those things. I felt so solid on my feet. It's like, yeah, these guys are just like little kids. I don't care. And she's just like, "Okay, you have my attention." you know?
I love that because I think like, and this is like talking about polarity, right? Because I mean, we kind of like hinted about it, and I think polarity was from The Way of the Superior Man. I think he talks about that a lot, which like after talking to you and Veronica, you both convinced me to read. I mean, The Way of the Superior Man is for men, but it is good for women to read. And I, like I said, like I find his voice, David Data, to have the most condescending voice ever. And I
Definitely
was
read the
like,
book, not the audiobook. Yeah.
but it's like the reason why I decided to like, fine, I'll read it and not listen to the audiobook is because I've heard his name, his books referenced so many times. Even like I interviewed T. Gray, like he's part of the men's series. And credit goes to him for saying the term immature masculine. Because I was like, I don't like toxic masculine as a word. He's like, I like immature masculine
Yeah,
or
that totally
whatever.
makes sense.
I was
Yeah.
like, I love that. But like everyone's been referencing his book, and I'm like, whoa. So I'm reading it, and like I won't 100% because I'm not a guy, right? So like he's also writing from the perspective of a guy talking to a guy. I get that.
Yeah.
So I'm reading it. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I don't like that sentence. But like I feel like what the essence of what he's saying is, yeah, to go clean your room, to grow up and like appreciate the polarity of things, right? Like
Yeah. Well,
not
and not
appreciate the
just,
polarity, but create polarity. But
yeah, and not just him, but Esther Perel, in her book Mating in Captivity, also speaks of the same thing. Where,
mating in captivity.
yeah,
Okay.
because it's basically like, yeah, why is it that in our, especially American society, because I feel like that's who she's writing to, you just lose that spark after marriage. It doesn't have to be that way. But it's part of it is, we promote equality, and rightfully so. But again, it's important in certain contexts and it's useless in others. So at work, equality, absolutely. Legally, equality, absolutely. Mating, horrible. It does not work because you're not looking for you, you're looking for your complement. And I again, kind of like what you're to go to another part in at least my story, that I realized something that helped open me up was realizing that at one point, because I did do a lot of self-improvement, self-help books and that sort of things. I, want to be the best person I can. And there was one moment that I realized, and it was, shortly before I started taking those dance classes, that I'm as good as I can be. I'm a very responsible person, very orderly, methodical, and that sort of thing. But if I was going to continue to grow, I would need someone else. But it's
Mm,
okay, because now at that point I could accept my strengths and limits, and knowing that I genuinely need someone else to supplement that. And sure enough, I find someone who is, very fluid, very creative, this emotional mess that's just beautiful to watch, like, like the rains on this day. It's like I didn't want like someone who had like a sunny day all the time. I wanted someone like, Seattle, you love the rain and the weather and the change and everything. Yeah, it's sunny days, you have rainy days, and it's fluid and it's beautiful, and that's who I got, and I love it. And and for good reason. She can see things that I can't, and
Mm.
she's helped me, push me in ways that I need, and it works wonderfully. But again, it's part of accepting those limitations of yourself, knowing your strengths too, but knowing that your strengths are limits. But you're right, and so that helps to generate that polarity, because now instead of looking for, because it's like, if you're a very orderly person, you're not looking for someone who's also very orderly. You can do that. You're looking for someone whose weaknesses are orderliness, so that way yours can help them out, because that's the whole point of a relationship, is one person's strengths the other person's weaknesses, and vice versa. So you're stronger together. And that's beautiful, but that also means that it's not about equality. And it's those polarities that make the relationship rich. And I think that that's one of those things in our culture we don't quite understand, or we don't like to acknowledge, because I think that there is a push for equality in certain ways, sure, but I think that that's one of the costs of it, is we overlook that too.
Mm. Hats off to Veronica. I
Right?
love. Yeah, I
He's
just
the
when I
MVP of this podcast.
like what I love is like when I see like relationships that really do well and work out, it's because like there's so much love and respect for the other person that there's like, and I think it is because of like the personal growth work and also understanding the dynamics of relationships, polarity, and like it takes a grown ass man to like see himself and be like, oh, like I love what you said. It's like I came to this moment of like I can't continue to grow without someone else, which I think is so beautiful to like to see that and be like, okay, well, where's my person? Like
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
yeah. And again, it's not just relationships too. I mean, this can apply to lots of places like work or everything like that. If you have a boss that when things go down, he or she's blaming everyone else, yeah, it doesn't create a great work environment. But if someone, like, a thing falls down, they're like, okay, let's figure this out. Where did we screw up? Where can we improve? Let's figure this out. Let's get through the line, over the finish line together. That goes a long way. So it's not just about relationships where this is helpful. Obviously, it has a lot of different uses.
Yeah, no, that's I love that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, wow, I can talk forever.
I know this has been great.
Yeah, well, is there like so resources? You talked about Esther Perel,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
I'll share that in the show notes. Are there other resources that you think might be helpful for people?
I would definitely recommend, Jordan Peterson and his books and lecture series. And again, it's an interesting thing that he noted, because he has analytics he can follow, that because he's or at least at the time he was a college professor, he knew that most of his class were women, but most of the people who watched his videos were men. And it's just a really interesting thing. But he has lecture series about massive meaning. So this is kind of where I got into him initially, was just kind of how to address that sense of nihilism and meaninglessness that we all kind of feel in our society. And he was at least trying to wrestle with that question. And, I think that those are just really fun, because again, like, in his lecture series, he has so much heart, and he cares so much about, his students. And, he's very entertaining and has like very easy, accessible examples, right? He'll quote Disney films as his example and show, like, he thinks like Beauty and the Beast is a near perfect movie. And it's like, talking
Mm,
about Pinocchio or the Lion King. And he's like, yeah, you put the king up and then the sun's there, and that helps to illuminate. And that's why this is happening. And it just helps to, get a lot out of that. And it helps to see where we're at now, where we're trying to go. And yeah, they've been great and very useful, I find. So, and
cool.
talking with other guys, they also say same things like Jordan Peterson. All right, so he's been a great help with that as well. Yeah,
Cool. Well, thank you.
yeah.
And yeah, and then if people wanted to learn more about your work, I'll share your website in the show notes. But you also like you are like an expert astrology. Like I just love your perspective on things. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I know. Sadly, I don't have much of a online presence, so I'm kind of hard to get a hold of. But yeah, and anyone can figure out how to get a hold of me, talk astrology or things like that. Yeah, I will say one of the things that I've been listening to podcasts on, and there's this concept that I really love, because talking about the meaning crisis and how do we resolve it. there's this sentiment that I just love. It's called transjective. So what it is, you know, in our dualistic world, we have subjective items and objective items. And the transjective is the things that connect them both.
Mm.
And that is just really cool, because some of the examples that they gave, and again, I'm still learning this stuff, but it seems really powerful, because some of the items that would fall into that are things like investment, responsibility, that sort of thing. Just things that get you involved with life again, it feels like. And I think that can be really powerful. So that's just kind of what I've been studying recently. So
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for your time. I so appreciate you.
yeah, of course.
To help you feel more supported and nourished in your body and nervous system, you're invited to download the free I Am Supported meditation in the show notes. May you feel grounded in who you are as you become the fullest expression of yourself. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing with those who can benefit. Until next time.